Hi, good day, everyone. Tonight I will be talking about Syria, and it's going to be a couple of videos because it is just so complicated, and I realize that I'm trying to talk to my partner today about it. Um, the reason why I'm doing this tonight is that America shot down a Syrian fighter jet yesterday that was attacking a Syrian fighter bomber that was attacking Kurdish and other rebel forces that are backed by America. And we had warned them repeatedly to stop through a communications channel with Russia. And now we have to face the reality of a real in what is already one of the messiest wars probably in history of mankind. This has potential to be like the Balkans in World War One, or I mean, it's this has the potential to be World War, and it's all about how are we going to come to grips with the literally hundreds of sides fighting this war, um, and then on a micro level and on a macro level, how do we handle the five, six, seven, eight sides that are major players. Um, the major players are obviously Syria, Assad, the brutal dictator, and he is brutal. I don't care what anyone tries to defend him that his actions are justifiable. He's not. He's a horrific human being that has done unspeakable acts of terror upon his own people and helped create this mess almost purely by his own designs and killing innocent protesters, dropping bombs on people, destroying the lives of his country of his countrymen purely to keep power, which isn't necessarily to be unexpected if you look at history, but it's still despicable. Um, I'll get into him later. So that's Syria. Then there's the rebels. Now the rebels are the hundreds of sides I'm talking about. There is literally hundreds of rebel groups, militias. Beyond ISIS and Al Qaeda, there is tons of uh, literally hundreds of rebel brigades that even if they control just a neighborhood, have different beliefs than the guys that control the next neighborhood or the next town, the next city. And we have a ton of, and so what started as a secular, peaceful protest turned into a violent civil war and revolution that was spurred by Assad killing peaceful protesters, both by firing on them with his soldiers, and by dropping barrel bombs, and then releasing all the extremists in his own jail, all the Islamist extremists from his own prisons, setting them free, helping them to ferment the Al Qaeda, ISIS extremist ideology, so that he could then say, "Oh, I'm the reason you should back me because look at how terrible these guys are." He did that. It was brilliant. It wasn't just him. There is a lot of other things to ISIS and Al Qaeda, but he did use that. And so these rebels and these Syrians that wanted a peaceful, democratic society, secular society like they've had. That was the one thing they did have, a very secular, non-religious society as far as power. Now it's turned into a horrific fest where Syrian Sunni, Shia, Alawite, Kurds, Yazidi, all the different ethnic minorities and religious minorities have turned against each other. So there's the rebels. So that's two. Third is the Kurds. The Kurds are a major ethnic minority in Turkey, Syria, Iran, Iraq. And they are, of all of our allies in the Middle East, and I say this just in my own personal opinion, genuinely the best allies we have. They're great people. Men, women fight together. They have their issues. They even fight amongst themselves. They've done some terrible things as well. But on the whole, they are far better. Have shown real democracy, both in Iraq, where they've had their opportunity. They've showed the way towards having functional economies by holding themselves accountable without becoming religiously intolerant of others. They are quite secular. And we have backed them and finally started to arm them more than any other rebel group in the last couple of years. And it took long enough, but we are doing it. And even though the Syrians don't like them and the Turks don't like them, and in reality, Iraq doesn't like them and Iran doesn't like them. No one likes them because they are a powerful minority, and it puts America and Russia in a tough spot because we both, some of the few things we agree on, we both support the Kurds and we both arm the Kurds, but Turkey, our NATO ally, joke, and Syria both don't like them, and both have tried to attack them. And this action, the Americans shooting down this fighter jet was to protect the Kurds. And we also embedded like Rangers and special forces and spec ops into the Kurdish forces so that Turkey, our ally, wouldn't go after them, even though we told them not to. They started bombing them and have been bombing them both in their own country, in Turkey, and in Syria, and that was a major uh, issue between the U.S. and Turkey. So we've got now Assad and his Syrians and the Alawites and Iran, and those who back him. We've got the Syrian rebels, the people that oppose Assad. We've got the Kurds, who are part of the Syrian rebels, but they are their own minority, and they control a large swath of the country with our support. The fourth player would have to be Iran. They are the Shia power of the world. They have that's a simple way to put it, but they have backed the Assad regime for decades, and then have gone into hyperdrive. And since the civil war started, supplying weapons, intelligence. They have backed the Hezbollah militia for 3 decades, and they have used their influence with Hezbollah to send in Hezbollah fighters from Hezbollah and Lebanon into Syria. And now they have, in the last couple of years, have been actually sending their own Revolutionary Guard forces to prop up the Syrian regime that lost thousands of soldiers, lost almost half its army to defections to the Syrian rebels. I probably should mention that earlier. When the civil war started. So Iran is a major player, and this ties into the other players, at least on the Arab side, is both Turkey. Okay, let me put it like this: Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states, like the United Arab Emirates and Jordan, are trying to counter, mainly Saudi Arabia. Let's just put it this way: Saudi Arabia is the next player. They are trying to counter Shia dominance in the region by propagated by Iran, and they have for a long time supported and exported a religious ideology called Wahhabism that is credited with giving birth to a lot of this extremism in Islamic terrorist groups such as Al Qaeda and to an extent ISIS, because both organizations are inherently Sunni, though ISIS take it far further than Al Qaeda has, at least in the past. The Saudi Arabians are now being welcomed by us Americans, and we just signed the largest arm deal in history with them. And the Saudi Arabians are using this to support their own rebels, potentially terrorists. We're not quite sure, but it's probably true. In Syria, and in their own proxy war in Yemen against Shia Houthi rebels that they say Iran has supported, which they have, but they basically have been causing a huge humanitarian crisis, not only dropping bombs, American-made bombs, onto the Yemenis people, but also supplying or starving them, cutting off all aid to Yemen, forcing the Yemenis basically to starve into submission. And they are a horrific, brutal regime in Saudi Arabia. And because they have oil, we have protected them for a long time, and we've had a very strong relationship. They hated Obama because Obama a little bit walked away from them, and have enjoyed Trump because Trump is a narcissistic idiot that loves whoever sticks their nose up his ass. And so Saudi Arabia and Iran, this is a Sunni Shia war that they are fighting in proxied in Syria. So now we have we have Assad, we have the Syrian people / rebels, we have the Kurds, we have Iran, We have Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states that support the rebels and extremism. The sixth group is, well, I guess we might also say it is America. We have spoken out against Assad, but since this beginning of the Civil War, but Obama was far more interested in making the nuclear agreement with Iran on top of being overly cautious about using American military might in the Middle East. And while that's understandable, Obama truly fucked this war up for everyone. He needed to go in there, especially after what he did with Gaddafi, who I think was still, while being a horrific dictator, brutal dictator, was not nearly the is not it would let me put it this way. If we went after Gaddafi, which there were some reason to do so, why didn't we go after Assad? Now, Iran again is a big, huge supporter of Syria, and Obama did not want to have a conflict with them during the tense negotiations. But with this, and with Obama's red line of chemical weapons that he backed away from, when Assad used chemical weapons on his own people in 2013, we gave up our best chance to, we as not just Americans but as the world gave up our best shot to end this war in any way, somewhat of a peaceful way. And so now we are stuck with Americans having spent $500 million training what turned out to be 60 or 50 fighters who, when they got into Syria, we trained them in Jordan. CIA, we sent 500 million, trained them, put them into Syria, and or from Turkey, and when they walked over the border, they immediately pledged allegiance to ISIS. That's real. That happened. It's an absolute travesty. That was American strategy. We would bomb ISIS. We would never bomb the Syrians directly. We never attacked the Syrian government directly under Obama. We only went after ISIS, who Obama called a JV team, and said, just because you put on a Lakers jersey doesn't mean you're Kobe Bryant, in reference to ISIS being the JV team of Al Qaeda. That is how misinformed Obama was. It's how, and I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, I thought it was quite weak. It's never weak to walk away from a fight, especially when we get to send other parents, women, sons and daughters to war to fight and die, particularly in another country around the world that necessarily doesn't have anything to do with us. But at the same time, if we want to hold our heads up and say, yes, we are America, we have all these wonderful things, unlike in Iraq, where we just took out a brutal dictator because I don't want to get into how stupid that was. This time there was a popular rebellion, a secular rebellion, a rebellion where there was people of all ages that were marching together, wanting and demanding democracy and accountability of the government, and they were brutally killed and tortured and imprisoned and had everything taken away from them. And we stood back and did nothing to Assad. Now with Trump, the Assad regime has been attacked both with missiles after he used chemicals again and used sarin gas again against his own people. We attacked an air base, and we have bombed multiple convoys of Iranian and Syrian troops or militias in southern Syria that has approached a base near us that we have set up to stop the flow of Iranian weapons and troops into Syria that can eventually be used not just against ISIS or the Kurds, but also or American troops, but also against Israel, which we'll get to in a minute. The Syrians the Americans are focused on fighting ISIS, but now we have a real threat of fighting Assad and Iran, and really the final major player is Russia. This is what makes this all so complicated. I think it's why I saved them for last. Is Russia After the chemical attack in 2013, and after Obama threatened to send in, well, like, whatever, he didn't do anything. Putin pantsed Obama and, in a show of diplomatic force, agreed to take over responsibility for Syria, removing its chemical weapons. He removed all the weapons and then started bombing all the rebels in the name of defeating extremism, which he has to deal with in his own country in Chechnya, which is its own clusterfuck. And he used a military base, Lataka, that has been that the Russians have used for decades to. It's part of their long-standing relationship that goes far back to Assad's father, Hafez, and the Soviet Union. Um, they have helped. They started a brutal bombing campaign where they killed everyone. They didn't care what. Not that America has not been not just brutal, but flat out wrong in some of the things that we have done in these wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, Libya, it goes on and on. We have hit hospitals as well, but the Russians and Syrians directly targeted hospitals. Assad's regime has done that for the entire war. The Russians have joined them. To take back the city of Homs, they just bombed the shit out of everything. They did what Ted Cruz did. They tried to make the sand glow, uh, or said he was. What Ted Cruz said he would do. The Russians and the Syrians have bombed everything. The Russian spec ops have been kind of doing what we have been doing with our rebels and mainly the Kurds. The Russians have embedded themselves. They've given frontline logistic support, and the regime has used the Russians, both not just their special ops, but like their resupplying, their maintenance, their ability to consistently uh, rearm and resupply the regime's own fighters, whether it be airplanes, troops, the intelligence, and so the Russians have pretty much not necessarily married themselves, but they are in a complicated relationship with both Assad and Iran. They do not just simply purely support Assad. They want they have supported the Kurds against Assad's wishes because both the Russians and the Americans recognize that the Kurds are by far the most um, reasonable. Probably the best outcome is to have the Kurds with as much power as possible in the post-war Syria. Uh, the Russians now, after this event, are they've shut down what was the main communication line between the Russians and the Americans militaries, where we would talk to each other through this line of communication. It was through this line of communication that we warned the Russians that we were going to send these cruise missiles to the Syrian Air Force Base to let them know to get out, and they basically have, and they shut them down now. Um, Now there are more players, and there are more like Israel, which has been watching, has committed or has flown in missions and dropped bombs and shot some missiles and blown up some things in Syria, like they said were chemical weapons or terrorists, ISIS. Uh, the but they have, for the most part, remained out of it, besides arming some rebels, paying some rebels, taking care of soldiers, both from Syrian regime forces and the rebel side in the south near the Golan Heights, which they annexed from Syria in 1967. But Israel has, for the most part, remained. I'm sure they are extremely covertly involved, but they have not been openly uh, too involved. The true final players are the Islamist extremists in ISIS and Al Qaeda. Now, Al Qaeda, they are different from ISIS. They are older. They have their own ideologies. They were originally um, allied in the beginning of this war, and ISIS leaders, a lot of them actually originally did come from Al Qaeda back in 2004, 2005, 2006 from Iraq. They kind of split off, and ISIS actually has a large contingent of Ba'ath, former Ba'ath officials. That the Ba'ath Party was Saddam's party that was overthrown by America when we invaded Iraq. We dismantled the army. We took out all the Ba'ath political part. We took out the entire political organization, and so these people kind of plotted their revenge and their reascent to power. And they picked out Syria as the target because of the various minorities, uh, the ethnic diversity of Syria that could be manipulated. ISIS took a long time to research the Syrian, not just the civil war, but Syrian society. There was an amazing article that I read that I think was, I can't remember. I can't remember the website was. I think it was a German website actually that talked about this former colonel, Ba'ath colonel, that was killed that by Syrian rebels when they retook an ISIS held town, and he was again an intelligence colonel in the Saddam regime, and when they killed him and they went through his documents, they found basically extremely complicated flowcharts and information regarding ISIS and how ISIS planted spies in all the Syrian areas that they took over. They would have these spies send back information like who were the powerful people in town, who were the secular people in town, who were the religious leaders, who said what, who were the people to marry, and like it's genuinely in some cases ISIS had these operatives marry into certain families and they would kill everyone at the wedding. That's real. They would. So when ISIS in 2013 made their move, they were called the Al Nusra Front. When they made their move across Syria and then Iraq, they actually had the information on who was secular, who was the rebel leaders, who were the good soldiers, who were the good doctors, who were the educators, who were the people that would oppose their extremist psychopaths, sociopathic and psychopathic uh, ideology, and they killed them all. They literally went into all these towns, killed all the leaders of the towns in whatever form they were, whether it was lawyers, doctors, teachers, soldiers, commanders. They were known for assassinating rebel commanders, and they didn't fight the Syrian rebels. And um, they sorry, my sister just told me she was going to sleep. The 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 way they did it was ISIS did it was so effective. They either bribed, married, murdered mostly, or coerced people into uh, accepting their brutal regime, and then combined that with social media, modern social media tactics that were absolutely brilliant, formed a caliphate. And while Al Qaeda is still a prominent force, and I don't, and still has their own sway in both Syria, Iraq, and around the world, ISIS was something completely new and different and insane. It was absolutely insane. What and any reasonable person can see what they are. But they're not just a religious group. They were about power. These people are criminals. These are people that sell drugs, that deal oil, that deal in sex slaves, that do a lot of terrible things, but they do it within the context of modern human society. For as much as they say that they are pure form of Islam, they do a lot of things that are against the Islamic code because it makes money, because they're criminals, because they're psychopaths. And one of the ironic things is about ISIS is that not only did we probably arm them ourselves in America, I won't go as far as that we necessarily strictly created them, but they are a creation of our blowback of our actions from the CIA going back to the 80s, the 90s, even the 50s, the 60s, back 100 years to the Sykes-Picot line that the French and British set up to divide the Middle East, and that has led to a century's worth of fighting and upheaval in various parts of this past century. And now we have a ideology that has been both both supported by Saudi Arabia and Turkey, whether they admit it or not, um, and has taken the lives of tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands, displaced millions across Iraq and Syria, and they've committed some of the most brutal and just truly evil things that this world has not necessarily ever seen, but has ever seen in 1080 HD footage. And while their reckoning is coming, they we also have to recognize where they come from. And in a situation where there's chaos and there is desperation and there is little hope and there is death and war, people, men, especially when there's a religious identity associated with these men, become more and more extreme. To not only just a lot of these guys did not start out as just guys that unloaded whole clips of ammunition into someone's head. They didn't just start cutting off heads. These were kids one day, or someday in the past. These were children, and on all sides of this conflict, that is the true devastation: is that the children of Syria, the lives of Syria's youth, and that generation is not only just lost, it has been coerced into one of the most unspeakably terrible wars in our history that's claimed hundreds of thousands of lives and has no end in sight. And this is just a video. I was just talking almost exclusively about all these, like the bare minimum outlines of all these groups. And there's so much more in depth to go. But I'll stop now. Thank you for watching, and stay blessed, and genuinely think about how lucky you are if you're watching this from anywhere that has an internet connection and doesn't have bombs dropping on it. So thank you. Have a good night.